Finally got through.
Her voice was frighteningly low. I could sense her intense anger in just a few words. And I know who this voice belongs to. It's Shelley, my ex-husband's sister.
It's been quite a while, hasn't it?
As always, she's still assertive in her speech.
I've been trying to contact you many times, and yet you had the audacity to ignore me.
Her nagging tone hasn't changed. What is the purpose of your call?
Don't play dumb with me.
Shelley didn't seem to appreciate my businesslike manner, as her voice crackled through the speaker.
I lent you $30,000 because your child was enrolling in a private elementary school, right? So, repay that money.
I couldn't understand what she was saying. A child.
Exactly. Even though he's not that special. Quite an accomplishment, isn't it?
Whose child could she be talking about? Excuse me, but are you mistaking me for someone else? Since I had no recollection of any such conversation, I even began to doubt if the caller was indeed Shelley.
What are you talking about? Dean and Alice, your children, my nephew, right?
When did I and my ex-husband, Dean, have a child together? That was what I wanted to ask. Dean and I got divorced 5 years ago, remember? We definitely don't have any children. After a brief silence, Shelley burst into laughter. I woke up in the morning and opened the window. Despite the season transitioning into spring, the air that entered the room was still chilly. Trying not to wake up my husband, Dean, I started preparing breakfast. A slice of bread, vegetable soup, fried eggs, and sausages. That's my usual breakfast. After saying a prayer before eating, I had my meal alone. My husband works as a caregiver, and today he starts his shift in the afternoon. As I sipped on my coffee after the meal, my husband rubbed his eyes and slowly woke up.
Smells good. Could you make me some coffee too?
He said and opened a bag of energy bars from the kitchen shelf. I already had ground coffee beans ready, so I brewed some coffee for my husband. I handed him the coffee as he nibbled on the energy bar at the living room table instead of the dining table. He was engrossed in watching the morning news on TV and scrolling through his phone, not noticing the coffee I offered. After placing the coffee on the table, I grabbed my jacket and left the room. I'm off. There was no response from my husband. My name is Alice White. I recently got married to a man I met at the same workplace.
Good morning, Alice.
As I arrived for work, a new office clerk who joined in April greeted me. Good morning, Laura. I returned the greeting and punched my time card. At work, I go by my maiden name. This is partly because my husband also works here, but mostly to maintain a boundary between work and personal life. After changing in the locker room, I headed to my workstation. While I work at the same care facility as my husband, I'm not a caregiver. I work there as a nutritionist. As I entered the kitchen, breakfast for the residents was being served. I quickly glanced over the dishes that had returned to the wash area and started the dishwasher. As I tidied up the remaining items, I was stopped by one of the part-time staff members. She asked me to stop cleaning up and start preparing for lunch instead. Even though I'm a nutritionist, my role involves more than just planning menus. In our kitchen, we have cooks, kitchen assistants, and myself, all working together to prepare meals. We prepare daily dishes, soups, rice, and bread, arranging them on plates, serving trays, and then delivering them to the residents. I always hope that the meals are enjoyed by everyone. Over the countless meals I've helped prepare, I've watched as they're delivered, each time silently wishing for their satisfaction. Before starting the cleanup after the residents finished their meals, I headed to the office, where it seemed my husband had just arrived for work. I saw him chatting happily with Laura, who had greeted me earlier in the morning. They seemed to notice me watching, and awkwardly parted ways. Then my husband came over to me.
We were just chatting as I said hello.
I know that. Good morning, Dean. To shake off the slight unease I felt, I tried to mimic Laura's cheerful demeanor as I spoke. My husband chuckled and quickly made his way to his station. I grabbed my laptop from my locker and returned to the kitchen. When considering the elderly residents' health, meals tend to be bland, so I brainstormed ways to add variety while creating the menu. As I worked on this, it was time to start cleaning up from lunch, followed by preparing for dinner and the next morning's breakfast. By the time the users of the daycare service were leaving on the shuttle bus, my workday finally came to an end.
Good job today, Alice.
When I was changing in the locker room, Laura approached me again, just like in the morning. She's really outgoing. Even for someone like me, who tends to keep to themselves, she doesn't hesitate to come over. Thank you. I returned her greeting with a forced smile, quickly finished changing, and was about to head home. However, she continued to talk one after another.
What's it like working with your husband at the same place? Do you talk about work at home? Oh. But Dean seems so fun. It must be nice to come home to someone like him even when you're tired. I wish I could marry someone like Dean.
Whether she's actually listening to my responses, or if she even cares about what I say, it's like she's just talking to herself.
Well then, see you later.
She left with a sparkling smile, wearing a light pink coat. Caught up in her pace, I stood there dumbfounded for a while, but then I remembered that my sister-in-law Shelley was supposed to come over today, and I sighed.
What? Dean's working the night shift tonight?
My sister-in-law dramatically slumped her shoulders. You didn't hear it from Dean? She dropped her bags heavily onto the sofa and plopped herself down with a thud, glaring at me.
If he's not here, you should have told me earlier.
She ignored my question. My sister-in-law dotes on Dean and seems to view me as an adversary. Most of those bags on the sofa are probably gifts for Dean.
By the way, Alice, I'm hungry. What's for dinner?
My sister-in-law asked without even glancing at me as she turned on the TV while I was preparing dinner in the kitchen. When I first got married, I was surprised by how unabashed she was, but now I'm used to it. I've toughened up quite a bit myself. I've made meatloaf, green salad, and a hearty soup tonight. I carried the meal to the table in front of the sofa where my sister-in-law was sitting.
As usual, such plain dishes.
While I couldn't help but think, well, then don't eat it. I muttered a quiet, I'm sorry. But I knew my sister-in-law wouldn't hear it anyway.
Dean is still young, and caregiving is such a physically demanding job. Are these simple meals really enough for him?
It was the usual nagging from my sister-in-law. I just nodded along. Yes, yes, while internally brainstorming ideas for the facility's menu. Maybe I could give the meatloaf a Chinese twist, or try expanding the variety of soups.
Are you even listening?
Perhaps I seemed absent-minded, as my sister-in-law's tone grew sharper. I'm sorry. Once again, I muttered quietly.
Marrying someone who can't even listen to others. Dean deserves better. Come to think of it, none of his ex-girlfriends were any good either.
Every conversation with her overflowed with her overprotective love for her brother. After ranting on for a while,
Dean is not here and it's boring being around you.
With those words, she left. She had finished the meal I prepared. Despite her complaints, it seemed she found it delicious. That gave me a sense of relief. The next morning, as soon as my husband returned home, he confronted me. It didn't matter to him that it was supposed to be a relaxing day off for me.
I heard my sister came over yesterday. Why didn't you tell me?
Like sister, like brother. Why couldn't they have sorted things out between themselves instead of putting me in the middle? I did tell you. I told your sister that you were on the night shift. And I also told you in advance that she was coming over. As I responded calmly, Dean stormed off to the bedroom, breathing heavily. Before getting married, he was kind, popular with the residents, and we had fun together. But once we started living together after marriage, his attitude started changing, and sometimes he would join his sister to belittle me. I was fed up with him, but people at work envied me. Come to think of it, even Laura said she wanted to marry someone like him. He may have a good facade, but I'm the one who fell for it. That day, my husband woke up in the evening and immediately started getting ready. When I asked if he needed dinner, he said he was going out for drinks with colleagues. I hadn't heard anything about that. Could it be that it's with that new office clerk who joined recently? I asked jokingly, but his face turned red in an instant, and he eventually raised his voice.
What I do on my day off and who I have dinner with is none of your business. Are you accusing me of cheating? You don't trust me.
He got angrier than I expected, and I was taken aback. I apologized sincerely and saw him off. Afterward, I sat there, lost in thought. What exactly is marriage? But no matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't find an answer. I had dinner alone and decided to go to bed early for work the next day. And so, the same kind of days passed by, and it had been 2 years since we got married. My husband remained cold towards me, and my sister-in-law continued to come to the house, leaving behind her nagging remarks. We hadn't had any children, and I couldn't say that our relationship was good. In fact, my affection for my husband was fading day by day. During break time, as I listened to the conversations of the kitchen assistants, it seemed that everyone was experiencing similar situations. However, those who complained about their husbands seemed somehow happier. Despite all the complaints, they had been together for many years, so there must be some feelings there, I thought.
Alice, your husband can't be like that, can he?
But no matter how I tried to reassure them, no one believed me. One evening, as I was leaving, I saw my husband and Laura chatting happily. I had witnessed their friendly interaction almost every day. While their closeness used to bother me, I had grown numb to it over time. One morning, as I was enjoying coffee after a meal, my husband came downstairs. "Are you going somewhere?" Even though it was our day off together, we usually spent it separately. Seeing him getting dressed so early made me suspicious, so I asked.
Yeah, I'm going out for a bit, but before that, I need to talk to you.
He said, looking at me with an unusually serious expression. A strange feeling stirred within me. As I faced him, he looked down, avoiding eye contact. A heavy silence hung in the air, and eventually, He began to speak hesitantly. As time went by, I decided to leave my job at the care facility and started working as a cook at a childcare center. It was a small center, so I was much closer to the children, and seeing their unfiltered emotions every day seemed to awaken something within me. Unlike before, every day felt bright and lively.
Goodbye, Alice.
It was already 5 o'clock, so I started to head home, and the children called out to me. "See you tomorrow." I waved back and hurried along the way, exchanging quick greetings with the childcare staff and the parents who had come to pick up their children. During work, I received a call from Shelley. After finishing work and checking my phone, I saw several missed calls, which made me feel uneasy and wanted to get home as soon as possible. Upon arriving home and closing the front door, my phone rang again. Surprised, I checked it, and this time it was from an unknown number. I was certain I shouldn't answer this call. It must be from Dean. I've received calls from him before, asking for money. I have no attachment to Dean whatsoever, nor any sympathy for him. Certainly, I had no intention of lending him any money. When I firmly refused, he started resorting to silent calls and even stalking. Even when I blocked his calls, he would change his number and continue to contact me. Eventually, he started waiting for me outside my workplace, forcing me to switch jobs multiple times. His persistence became unbearable. After finally consulting the police about the situation, he seemed to give up for a while, but then... Will I have to go through that ordeal again? For now, I decided to turn off my phone and avoid any contact from those siblings. To calm myself down, I slowly sipped my coffee. Why do I have to be pushed to the brink like this? When will I ever be free from those siblings? I opened the window and looked up at the night sky, lost in thought. Since blocking calls from Sherry and Dean, I had enjoyed peaceful days. I had been avoiding answering calls from unknown numbers, but as I changed jobs frequently, I started to have more acquaintances. Then, one day, I answered a call from an unfamiliar number.
Finally got through.
Her voice was frighteningly low. I could sense her intense anger in just a few words. And I know who this voice belongs to. It's Shelley, my ex-husband's sister.
It's been quite a while, hasn't it?
As always, she's still assertive in her speech.
I've been trying to contact you many times, and yet you had the audacity to ignore me.
Her nagging tone hasn't changed. What is the purpose of your call?
Don't play dumb with me.
Shelley didn't seem to appreciate my businesslike manner, as her voice crackled through the speaker.
I lent you $30,000 because your child was enrolling in a private elementary school, right? So, repay that money.
I couldn't understand what she was saying. A child.
Exactly. Even though he's not that special. Quite an accomplishment, isn't it?
Whose child could she be talking about? Excuse me, but are you mistaking me for someone else? Since I had no recollection of any such conversation, I even began to doubt if the caller was indeed Shelley.
What are you talking about? Dean and Alice, your children, my nephew, right?
When did I and my ex-husband, Dean, have a child together? That was what I wanted to ask. Dean and I got divorced 5 years ago, remember? We definitely don't have any children. After a brief silence, Shelley burst into laughter.
Are you out of your mind? Did you really think you could get away with such a lie just because you don't want to repay?
Even though she said that, I genuinely had no idea what she was talking about. The story seemed completely off, so I asked for more details, and it turned out that Sherry didn't know that Dean and I had divorced. When she asked Dean for repayment of the money, he told her he had entrusted everything to me.
Anyway, Dean says he entrusted everything to you, so give it back to me right away.
I was left speechless as she abruptly hung up the phone, but soon, a boiling anger began to well up inside me. 5 years ago, Dean told me that he wanted a divorce because he had impregnated Laura. I wasn't particularly attached to him at that point, and I even felt disgusted to know the fact. So, I immediately agreed to the divorce. Could it be that he had been lying to his family, claiming that the child born between him and Laura was actually ours? Dean's parents had already passed away, so even if he had kept it a secret from Sherry, I couldn't understand why he would do such a thing. Moreover, even after the divorce, Dean kept contacting me, asking for money. Of course, I never obliged. I was so angry that I headed to the care facility where Dean was. Entering through the main entrance, there was a reception desk right away. It had been 5 years since I left, and the receptionist was someone I didn't know. "Is Mr. Dean White here?" I asked eagerly, leaning forward. The receptionist, taken aback by my intensity, sought help from a veteran staff member who was standing behind her. The veteran staff member approached me upon seeing my face. Since I also knew her, we were both delighted to see each other after such a long time. However, this wasn't the time for that. I told her that I had business with Dean and asked her to call him. From her reaction, it seemed that here too, I was still considered married. Come to think of it, I couldn't see Laura around. Perhaps she had quit her job to focus on raising her child. As I pondered over these thoughts, Dean hurriedly approached.
Please don't come here.
He whispered to me, leading me outside to avoid attracting attention. It's been a while. I certainly wasn't happy to see him again. Frankly, I never wanted to see his face again.
What's going on today?
Despite my feelings, Dean seemed oddly fidgety. It was unsettling. In brief, I recounted the story I had heard from Sherry. "So, make sure to pay her back, okay? $30,000. With those words, I turned my back on him and left. While I was curious about why he hid our divorce and who Sherry's nephew might be, I just wanted to get away from there as quickly as possible. When I got home, I immediately took a bath. I felt like I had been exposed to dirty air, so I wanted to wash it all away. After getting out of the bath, I checked my phone and saw a message from Dean.
I don't know anything. If my sister is telling you to give money back, then it's up to you to figure it out.
I was stunned by the message when I heard the sound of the front door opening.
I'm home. Alice? What's wrong?
Hearing the voice of Oscar, with whom I lived together, I felt relieved and tears welled up in my eyes. Watching him flustered by my crying, I couldn't help but chuckle, finding his reaction adorable.
Hey, are you okay now? Can I ask what happened?
I am soon to marry him, who cuddles up to me with eyes as moist as a puppy's. While I had mentioned my divorce history, I wondered how he would react if he knew about the troubles with my ex-husband. That's why I hadn't told him about the calls from Dean or Sherry, or the past stalking incidents. I'm okay now. Sorry for surprising you. I want to be with Oscar forever. Meeting him has taught me what true love is. Even as we age, I want to walk alongside him, cuddled up together. With him, we can support each other while respecting one another. And above all, I didn't want to lose him. I'll manage on my own somehow. As I tried to prepare dinner as usual, pretending not to let Oscar know about the troubles with Dean, Oscar grabbed my arm with a serious expression. His grip was strong, and I couldn't move from that spot.
Alice, you're hiding something, aren't you?
Oscar was a detective. It didn't take long for me to realize that I couldn't escape from his straight gaze. I knew I couldn't deceive or lie to him. I'm sorry. I lowered my head and told Oscar about the situation, waiting for his reaction. Surely, he would be disappointed. As long as there were conflicts with my ex-husband, or rather, as long as I hadn't properly settled my past relationships, he probably wouldn't want to be with me anymore.
Why didn't you tell me until now?
I could feel him slipping away just like that. Even though I wanted to speak up, my voice wouldn't come out. I just kept looking down. What expression was Oscar wearing as he faced me? I was too scared to check. Oscar let out a deep sigh. It's over. Just as I thought that, I found myself in his arms.
Don't bear it all alone, rely on me more.
In the warmth of Oscar's embrace, I could feel his arms trembling. He was anxious too. He asked me to share half of the burden I had been carrying alone. I had never felt so fulfilled before. In his arms, I finally understood what happiness truly meant. A few days later, I called Dean and Shelley to my home. They arrived in high spirits, but their confidence faltered when they saw Oscar by my side.
Who's this guy?
Shelley glanced at Oscar and me with disdain, but Oscar paid no attention to her and began questioning Dean. He asked about the $30,000 loan, the date he borrowed, and the reasons for hiding the divorce from his own sister. Oscar asked politely and in a gentle tone, but Dean's answers were all evasive and unsatisfactory.
I don't care about the reasons for the loan or the divorce. Anyway, Alice, you held on to it, right? So, if you just give it back to me, that's all that matters.
Sherry seemed determined to make me pay.
Are you okay with your brother being charged with fraud?
Oscar looked at Sherry with a piercing expression.
There's no way my little Dean could commit fraud.
Sherry glared back at Oscar, refusing to back down. Despite being the subject of discussion, Dean kept his head down. Oscar returned his attention to Dean and began to explain slowly.
Using false information or misleading facts to deceive others and gain illicit profits constitutes fraud. Are you telling the truth?
Seeing Dean still silent, Sherry couldn't stand it any longer and confronted Oscar.
Who do you think you are? You're just a stranger. Can't you, as a legal amateur, stay out of this?
Sherry works as a clerk in a law firm, but she's not a lawyer. Amateur. As I pondered this, Oscar countered.
I'm a police officer. Interrogation is part of my job as a detective. While I'm not a legal professional like a prosecutor or a lawyer, I do have some knowledge.
Sherry and Dean stared at Oscar with wide eyes. And also, I couldn't hold back any longer and spoke up. He's my fiancé. He's not just a stranger. Now, both of their gazes were fixed on me. Truly siblings. Their astonished faces mirrored each other. With Oscar being revealed as a policeman, Dean seemed to resign himself and began to speak the truth. He confessed that after divorcing me, he tried to be with Laura, who was pregnant, only to find out that Laura had a boyfriend and he demanded compensation. However, Laura herself didn't want to break up with her boyfriend and decided to terminate the pregnancy to reconcile with him. Dean was also demanded to pay for the abortion expenses. Feeling emotionally and physically wounded, she threatened him to let his colleagues at work know about it. Consequently, he had to pay the compensation to Laura as well. After that, he found himself with too much spare time and couldn't stop spending money on mobile games, leading to overwhelming debt. Just listening to it made my head spin. It's embarrassing to think I was once married to such a pathetic man.
So, who was that child then?
Sherry seemed quite shocked too. There was no vigor in her voice.
I asked a coworker's child to pretend. I promised to give him pocket money and buy him things he wanted.
How foolish can he be?
I can't believe Dean would lie to me like that.
Sherry looked up at the sky. Tears were streaming down her eyes, but I couldn't have any sympathy.
This is the truth. Now, please talk it out between yourselves. And get out of our home as soon as possible, you strangers.
When Oscar raised his voice, both of them flinched and quickly left the house. After that, neither of them ever contacted me again. 3 years later, Oscar and I were preparing to move into a new apartment. Since that incident with the siblings, we hadn't had any dealings with them, and I've been enjoying peaceful days. Most importantly, a new life is about to join us. A moving truck arrived and our belongings were carried out of the room one by one. We looked at the now empty space and laughed, realizing how spacious it was. I wondered if the baby inside my belly was laughing with us as I could feel them moving. We got into the car and headed towards our new home. During a red light, I noticed a man walking hand in hand with a woman. Her face looked familiar. Oscar seemed to notice too. I gently touched his hand as he gripped the gear lever. He squeezed my hand back gently. The woman being led looked at us. However, she seemed unable to remember who we were. She stopped in the middle of the crosswalk, looking lost, until the man with her urged her to keep walking. As the light turned green, Oscar drove on. As we passed by, the man seemed to be shouting insults at the woman, but our car kept moving. That's fine. I've overcome the past and found happiness. With Oscar and the precious little one on the way, I'll walk into the future. In the warm sunlight pouring down on us, our car drove straight ahead. Cherry blossoms were in full bloom along the roadside.
My brother's here.
The first time the 3-year-old daughter went to my in-laws' house, she pointed to the old barn and said that. I was shocked by those words. No way. That can't be. Actually, my son, who was 2 years old at the time, went missing around the in-laws area 5 years ago. That was the place we searched extensively. But if my daughter says so, maybe there's no mistake. Because she has a mysterious power. With trembling hands, I opened the heavy door, and an unbelievable sight met my eyes. It was a moment when I was liberated from long suffering. It was 3 years ago when my daughter Emma was born.
Since we have a daughter now, let's forget about Justin.
My husband Louis told me that. But
I think it's better for you that way.
I bit my lip and stayed silent without arguing. Maybe it was his way of caring for me, but I couldn't forget about my son Justin. It was my negligence that led to my son's disappearance, and I had been blaming myself ever since Justin went missing. That day when the incident happened was a Sunday at the end of April 5 years ago.
Today, go to my parents' house.
Louis, who is usually gentle, said so forcefully at that time. Sure, but why all of a sudden? Is something going on?
Looks like my parents are preparing for Children's Day and want to see Justin.
They wanted to show their first grandchild the impressive fish decorations swimming in the sky and the ornaments displayed in the alcove. Or so they said. My in-laws' house was in the countryside, taking over 2 hours by changing trains and bullet trains. We both worked, with my husband working for a major company in the city and me doing translation work from home, so we couldn't visit home easily. I feel uneasy. But let's do our duty to my in-laws, who I should really consider as my own parents. There was another reason why we didn't visit my in-laws' house much. My mother-in-law always treated me harshly for being a daughter-in-law. But since my parents had already passed away, I convinced myself and left my husband, who had to work on his day off, and went to my in-laws' house with my son. As soon as we arrived, my in-laws welcomed Justin with joy, saying, "The heir has come." But as expected, my mother-in-law glared at me. Louis ended up with a worthless wife. Not only did you take away my son, but you won't let us see our grandson. I'm sorry. My job keeps me busy, and I can't find the time. You, a woman, acting so high and mighty with a job. I never liked you from the start. She kept throwing one cold word after another at me. Because of you, my son has changed. He doesn't even come back as the heir. But that's because Louis decided it himself. I don't want to hear such talk. It's all your fault. No matter what I said, my mother-in-law wouldn't accept me. My father-in-law, who stood beside her, was kind to me, but it seemed he couldn't oppose my mother-in-law and pretended not to hear. Maybe if my husband had been there, he would have defended me, but at that moment, I could only endure. Still, my son was delighted to see the big fish decorations and the impressive Children's Day decorations he couldn't see in the city. Furthermore, my in-laws owned a large, impressive sake brewery, and there were big trees in the spacious garden.
Mom? Here. Take it.
Approaching me and holding out his hand was a flower petal. He gave me a present. Thank you, Justin. As I replied, Justin smiled satisfactorily. Then I was called by my father-in-law.
Sorry, but could you help carry the luggage?
He asked me to carry about 10 large cardboard boxes loaded on the truck into the barn. Come on, big guy, let's go. I took my son's hand as he squatted under the tree looking at the flower petals and decided to leave him with my mother-in-law indoors. While I help your husband, please take care of Justin. Whatever. My mother-in-law didn't even look at me, pulled Justin toward her, hugged him, and smiled. Feeling relieved to see that, I returned to the garden to help my father-in-law again. After a while, when I finished carrying all the luggage inside, my son was not beside my mother-in-law. Hey, where's Justin? Huh? I don't know. He said he was going to Mommy's. But he hasn't come. I frantically searched inside and around the house, but I couldn't find him anywhere. My son suddenly disappeared. How far could he go with his 2-year-old legs? Maybe he's in those mountains? Behind my in-laws' house, there was a dense mountain, and I thought he might have wandered in there. Justin, where are you? Answer me. Mommy's here to pick you up. I searched desperately, shouting until my throat was dry, but I couldn't hear my son's reply. My husband also rushed over upon hearing my call and comforted me, saying, "It's not your fault. It's useless to search anymore." On that day, my mother-in-law started saying such things. "Please. Can't you ask the police to help and get the local people to cooperate?" I desperately bowed my head to my mother-in-law, who refused to accept it. "I won't allow that. Reporting to the police would be shameful. Besides, it's your fault for taking your eyes off him." "I'm sorry. But right now, we need to find Justin."
That's right, Mom. It's not the time to worry about appearances. I'll go ask.
If Lewis says so. I guess there's no helping it. Reluctantly, my mother-in-law agreed as asked by my husband and contacted the local people. At that moment, I once again thought that Lewis was the only one on my side, and tears almost welled up. "Thank you. I'll contact the police then."
I think it's better not to.
"Why?" "We need to find him as soon as possible."
In a maze-like countryside, the locals might know more. The police might prioritize finding the criminal over the search. Let's start by searching with the locals.
I agreed to my husband's idea, as long as Justin was found quickly. However, despite the efforts of many people searching, my son was not found. We should still report to the police.
You're right. I'll go now.
An hour later, when my husband returned home, he said that they would expand the search area deep into the mountains and investigate the possibility that someone had taken him. I hope he's found soon. Please be safe. Despite searching everywhere, my son couldn't be found, and 3 days after he disappeared, I was taken home by Lewis. Even after that, I worried about Justin and visited my in-laws' house alone many times, starting a life of searching in the mountains and surrounding areas. Because of you, our grandson is gone. Don't ever come to our house again. But my mother-in-law disliked me, and I eventually couldn't get close to my husband's parents' house. In hindsight, maybe I should have quietly searched without telling anyone. Even in such a situation, Lewis always empathized with my feelings.
I'm thinking of cutting ties with my parents, who always treat you coldly.
One day, he suddenly told me that. Is that really okay?
You don't need parents who make you suffer. And let's stop looking for Justin anymore. I'm worried about your health.
Since my son disappeared, I couldn't sleep at night, couldn't eat, and ended up losing weight until my bones were visible. Persuaded by my husband, I decided to believe that someone is protecting Justin and he's still safe. Eventually, I became pregnant with our second child and gave birth to a girl. We named her Emma. I never forgot about my son, but I decided to pour all my love into raising my daughter as well. Actually, Emma had a slightly mysterious power. For example, when I was searching for something without saying anything to her, Emma would always bring it to me right away. There were also times when she helped me. While walking in the nearby residential area,
That big guy wants mommy's bag.
And when my daughter muttered that, a young man on a bicycle coming from the front reached out for my bag. At that moment, when I changed the hand holding the bag, the man lost his balance and fell. The perpetrator was apprehended by the nearby people who witnessed the whole thing and safely handed over to the police. With such incidents happening, I thought Emma's power was real. However, even if I told my husband about this story, he only found it creepy and didn't believe it, so I stopped talking about it to him afterward. Emma grew up healthy, and when she turned 3 years old, suddenly, she asked, "Where are my grandpa and grandma?" I was startled by those words. Come to think of it, my parents-in-law had shown a lot of affection to my son. Although I was too preoccupied with grief to notice at the time, my husband's parents must have been sad when Justin disappeared. Just like me. It might be selfish not to let Emma meet them just because of my feelings. Thinking that way, I decided to consult with Lewis.
I've cut ties with my terrible parents. There's no need to let our daughter meet them now.
He vehemently opposed it with a grim expression. But I felt an indescribable discomfort with his attitude. In hindsight, maybe it was a premonition of something. A few days later, without telling my husband, I decided to visit my in-laws' house with Emma for the first time in years. When I arrived at the nearest station and called to inform them that we would take a taxi there, my father-in-law ended the call unilaterally in a fluster, saying, "I'll pick you up by car right away." Since I was already in a taxi, I tried calling back, thinking we shouldn't miss each other, but the call didn't go through. By the time I arrived near my in-laws' house, I decided to take a detour from the road with Emma holding my hand. As we walked along the narrow path leading to my in-laws' house, my daughter suddenly pointed to the barn behind the building.
My big brother is in there.
Eh? Even though I hadn't told her about Justin, it was strange that she suddenly said that. Could it really be? With a last hope, I peeked into the dimly lit barn and was met with a surprising sight. It was the figure of a boy chained to a pillar in the barn. It was my beloved son, whom I had never forgotten for a single day. Justin. I frantically went around to the entrance of the barn, but it was locked and I couldn't get in right away. I swung the hatchet that was nearby over and over again, and somehow managed to unlock it, perhaps because the key was rusty and old. I finally found you. Tears overflowed as I hugged my son.
Who are you? Are you going to help me?
Looking puzzled, Justin stared at me, and I said, "Let's get out of here right away." He looked worried and said,
Grandpa and Grandma locked me up. I wonder if this is okay.
Might that be true? I was so shocked that I lost my words. Surprisingly, my husband's parents were involved in the incident of my son's disappearance. "I'm your mommy. I've been looking for you all this time." To rescue my son, I took pliers from the toolbox that was in the corner of the barn and cut the chain. Then I took the children and hurriedly entered a mountain path off the road. This was a part of the mountains that I had entered many times to search for Justin, so I had a little familiarity with the area. First, I need to contact Lewis. Thinking so, I took out my phone from my bag, and although I was so focused on rescuing my son that I didn't notice, there were tons of missed calls from my husband. "Hello, it's you?"
Finally got through. I'm heading to my parents' house. Don't talk to the locals.
My husband started saying incomprehensible things like not trusting the locals. Even though I hadn't told him anything, Lewis knew that we were at my in-laws' house. Probably his father had contacted him. But still, why would he dislike contact with the locals who had helped search for Justin together when he disappeared?
So, where are you now?
I'm at the station, waiting for your father to come. Feeling a bad premonition, I deliberately lied to my husband.
Oh, then that's good.
I felt something was wrong with Lewis, who seemed relieved. I continued to walk along the mountain path with the children and decided to stop by a house along the way. it was the home of the Smiths, who had helped in the search for Justin before. Hello. Justin has been found. When I spoke up, they looked very skeptical.
What are you talking about? He was found right away after you left, wasn't he?
Eh? What do you mean?
We were told that he was found in the shed right after you left.
That's impossible. I was bewildered, and Mr. Smith explained further. But it turned out that they had been told by my parents-in-law that since our son's wife ran away with another man, we are raising Justin in that house. That's a lie. I vehemently denied it, and Mr. Smith twisted his head, saying, "It seems like the story we heard was different." The locals believed the story from my in-laws because they occasionally saw my husband return to his parents' house, and they had seen Justin at his entrance ceremony. So, does that mean Lewis was also involved in deceiving me? That's too much. I trembled with regret at the fact that my son had been torn away from me all this time. At that moment, Emma gently held my hand.
Mommy, I'm glad my big brother was found.
Smiling, she held hands with her newly met brother Justin with her other hand. Justin looked at Emma with confusion, and then looked up at me. Until then, Justin's expression had been stiff, but he looked into my eyes and said with tears streaming down his face,
Are you really my mommy? You didn't abandon me, right?
I haven't forgotten you for a single day. We'll be together forever from now on. Justin nodded silently. When I listened to Justin's story, he told me that his grandparents had received a call from someone and took him to the barn, telling him, "Don't make a sound. Hide," and chained him there just before meeting me. Thinking about how scared my son must have been, my body heated up with anger. I can never forgive this. The Smith couple, who had been watching our situation, offered their help. I immediately called my father-in-law and husband and told them that I was at the Smith's house. The first one to rush over was my mother-in-law. "Don't you dare take my grandson away on your own." She flew into a rage and tried to hit me, but the Smiths stopped her. "This child is my son. You told me he was missing and deceived me, didn't you? That child isn't Justin. He's my daughter's child." My mother-in-law tried to evade responsibility by claiming that he was her daughter's child.
No. He's my big brother.
That's right. Your story doesn't match hers. This child is Lewis's, right?
My mother-in-law mumbled and avoided eye contact. Then my father-in-law arrived and shouted, "We've disowned this wife. Don't take them away," and tried to take Justin back forcefully. He tried to forcibly take my son away from me, who wouldn't let go, but Mr. and Mrs. Smith intervened, trying their best to protect my son.
What are you doing? I cut ties with my parents. Let's go home.
Then, Lewis came running with a changed expression and told me, "I won't be deceived anymore. You're the one who separated Justin from me."
Stop saying weird things. I've always been on your side, haven't I?
I glared sharply at my husband, trying to evade the issue. "I can't trust you. I've decided not to let go of this child."
I don't know what you're talking about. Justin is gone. Give up.
My husband continued to deny the existence of our own son, who was right in front of him. Upon hearing this, Justin, with a tense expression, asked,
Am I not your child?
I don't know anything about you.
Nevertheless, Lewis continued to shower him with harsh words. "I won't forgive you. This time I'll go to the police and tell them everything."
Even if you do that, it'll just be laughed off as a family dispute.
My husband tried to escape somehow, but it didn't work out. There's evidence. Actually, I had detailed records of what happened when Justin disappeared, thinking it might be useful someday. I had recorded every little thing that happened afterward as well. So, I took a picture of my son chained in the barn with my phone and kept it.
I don't know about that. It's all what the parents did. It has nothing to do with me.
Lewis. What are you saying now? Didn't you say you'd hand Justin over as an heir in your place?
Mom, stop it. Don't say anything more.
As my mother-in-law argued with my husband and tried to act like she didn't know anything, they finally started to quarrel. Amidst their attempts to justify themselves, all the truths became clear. On the day my son disappeared, Lewis and his parents had conspired together, telling my son, "Let's go play," and took him to the car parked a little away. Then they temporarily left him at his aunt's house in a distant town, and when things cooled down, they brought him back to their house, and his grandparents took care of him. No matter where I searched, I couldn't find him. So, you disowned your parents and made sure they didn't come near here.
That's right. But still, you brought Emma here without my permission. If you hadn't done that, none of this would have been exposed.
This incident was prompted by my husband, who was being blamed by his parents for not having an heir and wanted to continue living in the city. So he plotted to hand over our son as his substitute. That's despicable. You only think about yourself.
But what else could I do? I hate the countryside. I had no choice but to give up Justin. Even if I told you, you would have opposed it, right?
Of course. There's no way I could let go of my own child. At that time, Lewis defending me was also an act by my mother-in-law and husband to prevent me from reporting them. They only told the locals to search for the child, and my husband never went to the police. I was completely deceived.
I'm sorry. So let's not go to the police. Justin is fine, as you can see.
That's right. I raised him with love. Isn't that enough? Besides, we're not family. Even my father-in-law bowed his head and begged, but I firmly refused them, rejecting their pleas. At that moment, the sirens of the patrol car, which the Smiths had reported, approached. The arriving police officers were shown a photo of my son chained, and my in-laws and husband were taken away. Afterward, my husband and in-laws were interrogated and arrested. I divorced Lewis and decided to claim $30,000 in compensation and $300,000 in child support for both children. Furthermore, I demanded $20,000 in compensation from my in-laws. Afraid of the heavy charges, my in-laws relinquished their land and property and agreed to pay in a lump sum. Since my husband was found guilty, he was fired from his company and now works multiple jobs to make payments. By the way, my in-laws put their house up for sale, but it ended up unsold, and they still live in the same place. However, they are seen with disdain by the locals and live in isolation. It's only natural since they deceived everyone, isn't it? I now live peacefully with my 2 children, away from my husband's knowledge. Justin has more smiles now and gets along well with his sister Emma, and I am very happy now. How was this story for you? Please subscribe to the channel as well. Well then, see you again in the next video.